just on the edge of the brick pile.
So it sounds like a lot of the things we're interested in are the periphery of the brick pile. Do we need a slow zoomed orbit of those items?
Yeah, I have no idea what that is.
I would say yes, but we would also want to maybe nuance it a bit. For example, the blue and white piece, if there is a design on that, we very much want to try to capture that, not have to come back later and say, oh, if we'd just gone another 3 centimeters, we would have seen, exactly what it is.
It's your boat, Jim.
Then let's make it so when it comes, it's like, not my boat, it's everybody's. But yeah, if we've got the time to do it, let's do it, but let's make sure amongst ourselves, team, that we are focusing on the ones we really want to take a look at.
Do you see that cup coming up on the right? The glazed cup? Just wondering if it's transferware or if it's some other design.
I have a sense that that's going to end up being a diagnostic tool. Just saying, the obvious.
We're seeing those little bits of copper every now and again, but does this vessel strike you as something that was copper clad? Or
Not necessarily. It could be that what we're looking at is the copper is buried, or that this is a more regionally built ship with a short lifespan that didn't require copper, or they didn't use copper feeding. Hard to say.
Hey, Andy.
Go ahead, co-pilot.
What is a man overboard button?
That marks a position on the map.
Oh, okay. Of where the ROV is, or where the boat is? Or?
Where the ROV is.
Okay.
It's poorly named. Or
hey, Jim, this is Doug. I remember when we were on
Site 15377
It's meant
in
to
Gulf.
mark
He
if
drew
something
some
falls off the ROV
suppositions about the age of the site based on the
you know, without a
designs
high
of
pack,
the chain plates.
being
And I
able
was
to
wondering
mark
if you
a
could
target
speak a little bit to what
easily.
that design evolution
Did
looked
you work
like,
on
or if
this?
you can draw any similar
I wrote it,
conclusions
yeah.
on the age
The
of
whole,
the site.
the whole
Based on
mission stuff?
Yeah,
That's
Certainly.
thanks.
Chain plate design, and for those of you ashore who are wondering what's a chain plate, it's a series of metal fasteners that attach to the side of a ship's hull that have lines running between them and to the top of a mast. Those lines are called shrouds. They attach to dead eyes. Sailors were a morbid bunch. And
talking to me, Ron?
they are what hold the masts in position. Earlier chain plates are so called because they are basically elongated loops of chain that ultimately terminate in a strap that goes around that wooden deadeye, which has three holes in it, somewhat resembling a skull, hence the name, that through which the lines, basically rope covered with tar, known to sailors as standing rigging, then help hold those masts in place. That style of chain plate begins in the 17th century, maybe even a little earlier, and it remains the standard up through the late 1700s, even up into the late 1800s, bearing in mind that as new ships are built, they're trying on different styles and new types of hardware, though it's not as fast an evolution as those of us who live in the iPhone age might appreciate. It's a little slower then. Just after 1800, chain plates go from big elongated loops of chain to shorter loops, and in particular, moving towards what by the 1820s is a very long rolled iron bar, which a blacksmith bends around that rounded deadeye at the end and then comes down to the bottom, sort of welds it together, and then that is pinned into the side of the hull, making a long double bar chain plate. And we date those to around the 1820s. I excavated a ship that was intact that was built in 1825 that happened. That then changes after the American Civil War into chain plates that are not rolled bars, but actually flat straps of iron that are bolted into the side of the ship. And we see those coming in after the 1870s, and really by the 1890s you see those. For those of you on the West Coast who are familiar with the historic three-masted lumber schooner C.A. Thayer at the San Francisco Maritime National Historic Park, she has those flat strap iron style of chain plates. What's also happening at the same time is that sailors are moving away from using standing rigging that is regular rope covered with tar. They're starting to move towards steel cable or steel rope. That begins with clipper ships, particularly built by the British in the 1850s to the 1860s. And there's a well-known story of two ships, an American clipper and a British clipper, colliding off the coast of China while racing one another. And the American captain, looking over at the British ship's very thin standing rigging, told his sailors to take their knives and cut away that insubstantial limey rigging, only to have their knives blunted when they discovered that what they were trying to saw through was wire.
That's very cool info. Thank you.
Did a great job, Josh.
As we move across the bottom, we're seeing tracks in the sediment from marine organisms. Might be a great thing to hear from our biology colleagues about who does that and what's going on.
Actually, we were just noticing there's a white test that is in the view in the upper right now, probably a little bit of a lag for you all, but that's a heart urchin, and that's the suspect of the tracks that we see is the heart urchin, which basically spends most of its time just walking around underneath, kind of staying covered up with sediment and eating things in the sediment. So that would be our guess, and we were just noticing there's several of those heart urchin tests scattered around the wreck. Here it comes again.
Yeah, we were laughing that maybe they were burrowing and ran into the debris of the ship and just stopped and couldn't go anywhere. But we haven't seen any. Well, we've seen one or two of these tests, the shell remains of these organisms in our dives, but we've seen many, many of these burrows, or the traces of their burrows, which is just that disrupted sediment you see at the top.
So for most people that are out there who are used to seeing perhaps a coral reef, I mean, this might look like a desert, but it's actually not, is it?
No, I've noticed quite a few chrysogorgid octocorals. They're kind of, maybe a foot tall. It's hard to, I haven't had the lasers on, so I can't tell exactly how tall, but they're kind of cylindrical and light-colored octocorals. Seen lots of those. There's a couple of sponges. Of course, there's these urchins. The fish that's laying in the middle, the big gray one, is I think a type of eel pout. And maybe if there is time at the end, we could get a few zooms on the biology just to make sure we get it characterized. But yeah, there's plenty of life down here. And the structure
the brittle stars also. Maybe you did mention
stars.
that, but there are several of those. At least two species, I think. But
is that a holothurian or whatever that right there is center screen making the track?
A holothurian, we've definitely seen some of those. Those are sea cucumbers, and those are kind of the purplish long things that we just went past one, or it was in the distance.
Yeah, right at the top of the screen as we make the turn, you'll see a purplish hot dog shaped sea cucumber.
And they can definitely make some tracks too, and we actually saw them defecate for the first time on video a couple of days ago. So we were calling that the holothurian outhouse, but they make very distinctive defecation piles.
They're actually quite ornate, very carefully laid out.
So a question that a number of us have in the archaeology world is, once it had been told to us that while there is marine life down there, when a ship, particularly a wooden shipwreck, lands on the bottom, it's as if the dinner bell has been rung for marine organisms. Is that the case?
There's definitely a whole group of organisms that eat wood. The shipworms are the one that you probably have heard of, and I bet you if we could look at that wood that we're seeing now, there very likely be some shipworms in there. So yes, anything that hits the seafloor, if it can be eaten, it probably will.
In the same vein, while we know of more modern wrecks being sunken areas to create an artificial reef,
coming in video?
At depth, do these wrecks, even as they deteriorate, do they also create an artificial reef?
Correct, thanks.
Sorry, you might have to repeat that. We had some crosstalk here. Can you repeat your question?
Certainly, and thank you. One of the questions is we know of more modern wrecks, of course, that are scuttled in shallower water to form artificial reefs. Even in deep water, something like this in its own way, could it be characterized as an artificial reef?
Anything that gets organisms off the sea floor, they will colonize, as you can see from just the little bits that are left here. So yeah, basically anything that provides structure in this otherwise very vast sedimented area, organisms will congregate around to get off the sea floor, get higher in the water column to feed, not be buried in sediment. So yeah, these definitely can act as deep reefs.
It's all relative, really. This area has very few organisms or lower diversity and abundances than what we see in the shallows, but any type of topography or structure like this becomes the oasis, and everything increases the numbers and the diversity of organisms.
Would that change over time as the wreck, of course, itself changes? Are there certain organisms that might want to be higher in the water column to feed that then migrate on once this wreck has been eaten?
There's definitely going to be a succession of types of organisms, you know, those that eat the wood until the wood is gone. It probably is just how the length of time that everything is out here for organisms to settle on. The longer there are structures to settle on, the more organisms will find it.
Thank you, Bridge. You can go ahead.
Find that structure and be able to grow.
Right. Thank you. I think one of the most enlightening things for us in the archaeology community is joining you all on these missions and understanding and seeing, demonstrating that exploration, while for us, tied to the human side of the equation, also really helps us unlock more understanding of the deep ocean environment, which really is the planet's final frontier.
It sure is.
The edges of framing that we're going over now, you see how they're spaced out on the wood? It's kind of just barely exposed right at the edge of that ballast line.
Yes, we do, and that's where this mapping is going to come in very helpful, is we will be able, I'm sure, you know, particularly if we can get a scale on this, to begin to learn more about what type of ship it might be. Frame spacing, size of frames is going to be important in estimating the overall size of the vessel. So this is very helpful.
Do we need to laser that distance on our list?
It wouldn't be a bad thing when we do it in close-ups if we can get a couple lasers on these. What it also looks like to me is if we pass the ballast pile area, that we were not only seeing frames, but we were likely seeing what could be ceiling linking, which would be at the bottom of the hull, on the inside of the hull.
Has there been, this is Leslie, I'm the geologist on board, and of course I'm looking at the ballast more than the biota, but some of the ballast is obviously brick, and there's a pile of ballast that we just passed over that looks less brick-like. I can't really tell if it's just weathered brick that might have been put on board or if it's actual rock material, but just out of curiosity, does the ballast on a vessel, is it brought in by wherever it is the vessel is built, or does the ballast get changed out?
Ballast gets changed, and some ships have a more permanent ballast later in time.
Mm-hmm.
The ballast can be changed because depending on what you're loading as a cargo, you're going to have a different trim to your ship, and you don't want to overload it.
Right, so you may have offloaded it in one port and added more in another port based on the cargo.
Yeah, ballast is very diagnostic. So to that end, when we're looking at the brick pile, I'd like, if we've got a minute, I'd love to take a look at those with you on board in particular. I'd like to get a good capture of some of that rock. And while you don't have it section or put into a lab, it would be very nice to get some perspective from you on what we're looking at.
And is the amount of ballast on this size of a vessel, is that normal, or do you have any idea? It just...
Again, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what they're loading. I mean, oftentimes we don't see cargo survive. I mean, here we're passing over, you can see there's definitely rock ballast. And I don't think that ballast, I think it is ballast as opposed to some sort of a stone cargo. Yeah. Is the ballast too much or too little? Hard to say. I mean, if the ship capsized, if stuff fell out, you wouldn't know. But again, ballast also is a reflection on what else you have on board that's heavy.
Right.
If it was, for example, a fishing vessel and it had a bunch of casks full of salted fish, that's going to certainly weigh a fair amount. And over the course of a voyage, particularly if you're offshore, captain may be dealing with that. The duties of the mate, in particular the first mate, calculate that as best as possible because you don't want to have an overloaded ship. If this is somebody, because we're 150 miles offshore, this is somebody that was caught in a storm and was flowing along, they may have been throwing stuff overboard in an effort to stay afloat too. So a whole variety of factors.
Sure.
But the ballast is very important.
And were bricks ever used as ballast but also transported as cargo at the same time? And the reason I'm thinking of that is the redness of the brick of this age. It's oxidized, could be iron rich to begin with, and I don't know, maybe one of the nearby ports such as Charleston or Savannah where we have a lot of red clay that might produce the rocks or the bricks. And maybe they were exporting bricks.
It could very well be because that is something they're going to be moving around. It could also be this part of an onboard structure, as we're talking about. An awful lot of brick, perhaps, to create a galley or a cooking area where you don't want to set the wooden ship on fire. It could be related to a try-works if these guys were whaling. It could also be cargo. But again, coming back to it, the way we're going to do our science is only after the detailed mapping and really understanding the spatial relationships and doing the rest. Only then would we pick things up. And in that case, we would be selecting in our research plan the most diagnostic artifacts. So to that end, not to pre-guess it, and this is not a recovery mission, among the things that would logically be
just wanted to confirm our bailout direction is
would be
southwest.
With the guidance of scientists like you.
Yes.
Perhaps a piece of ballast.
Great, thank you, Bridge.
Or more. Selected ceramics that might be very diagnostic, particularly if they have a maker's mark. A brick to be looked at and to determine where it came from. Wood samples, navigational instruments, particularly if they have the maker's mark on them or some indication. We do have a guess as to how old this wreck is, and that it's potentially a coastal or regional vessel. But we're also cognizant of the fact that we're just off the Gulf Stream, which is an ocean highway known to mariners for hundreds of years that can connect you all the way from Florida up to Nova Scotia.
Incidentally, the term try-works has been thrown out a couple of times, and just to explain what that is, they're usually a pair of large cauldrons that were used to render down the fat, the blubber taken from a whale, and were frequently mounted inside sort of a brick furnace-looking structure on the deck.
Your tripods are surrounded by the try-works. That's the brick enclosure.
Right. Right.
It's interesting, too. You look at the separate brick pile and then the ballast pile. It's almost like they've trimmed the ship out. They're isolated piles.
Ship, could we get an update on the estimated time remaining after the photogrammetry lines are complete?
Watch leads, this is Nav. I'll work on producing one. It's It's going to be a rough estimate.
Yeah, we have Nav working on that estimate right now.
Thank you.
Just noticed that we passed over some rather large, what looked like conch shells.
Yeah, I was just noticing that.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
And
Watch lead, Nav.
So biologists,
I can say we have 2 hours and 16 minutes of bottom time remaining, though.
Something that may have
right
been placed on board the ship and an indication of where it may have visited.
The only deep sea conch that I'm aware of is the, I'm trying to think, off of this region. We have whelks near shore, and the Bahamas have conchs.
Yeah, in Florida.
And Florida.
Tortugas.
Yeah.
There's
so
two.
One thing we might consider is that this actually may be quote-unquote cargo.
Yeah.
Or something that the crew has to eat.
Yeah, it looked more tropical than what we see here.
In my 8 years of video shading for these expeditions, I've never seen conch shell in the areas that I've traveled in.
Yeah, we haven't.
Well, I think this is a sign to us that the Conch Republic of Key West is going to claim this back.
Yeah.
If you get tired of Blake, you could call it the conch wreck.
Yeah, that's true. There's 2 hours and 16 minutes left of bottom time, just FYI.
Thank you.
And how much time do you think's left in the photogrammetry line?
Hold on, let me check.
Because we're trying to get an estimate on how much time we have for close-ups and zooms of certain things, like maybe the conch, the compass stuff, the octant, the ink bottles, and so on.
Roger that.
I did hear that. I'm still working on producing one. It's probably going to take me 5 to 10 minutes to do it. I'm going to try and average out a few lines. One of the main problems in producing an estimate is how far along we're going to go before we hit the edge of the survey area. So, which obviously will determine how many passes we have to do back and forth.
Unless it's older. But even then.
Just an update on our timing here. NAV's working on coming up with an estimate. A couple of factors here, so it'll just be a couple minutes before we get that estimate for you.
On that last pass, I counted at least 8 conchs stacked up.
Wow.
Yeah, those definitely look more like collected as opposed to resident.
Well, the clustering in particular, yeah.
Yes.
The taste for cerveci.
Back to the question on ballast, something that you reminded me of with the question on that is years ago I was doing a dig on land in San Francisco along what had been the old waterfront, now
Would you give me next to a group of an estimate on how many grid squares are on the line?
In the landfill was a variety of
Try and come up with an estimate of the line there.
The width?
Yeah, that's a lot more accurate than what I have on
some
iPad.
of that ballast was coral and a variety of other things that the California Academy of Sciences told us suggested that several of these ships had come from and had loaded ballast and then offloaded it on the San Francisco waterfront into the water.
It's about 13.
That came from the South Pacific and particularly in and around Tahiti as well as Fiji. So that was a nice reminder of the interconnected nature of the oceans and how they really are a highway moving goods, ballast, people, and ideas.
Yes, that's a very good reminder. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think we're getting pretty close to the tail end of this.
Good morning, team. I've had my cup of coffee now.
And Silbert.
Morning, Hans.
It's not 2:30 in the morning.
I don't know.
Almost 7, but
Andy's how long it is.
Can you stay up all night?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges.
No.
I told them that would
watch the World Cup
make
that
the
way.
accurate or the estimate be
What's
somewhat
that?
rough.
Yeah, these look very much like queen conchs. Although the one that you'll see, they have a large flange to them. And these are very common in the Bahamas. And they're great food, too. So, yes, yeah. So, they're great food. So they might, sort of like the tortoises of Galapagos, sailors may have put them on board alive and kept them.
Yeah.
So that they would be fresh meat once they were killed and then consumed.
In those digs in San Francisco, particularly from deposits from the California Gold Rush, bones from Galapagos were recovered as part of the faunal assembly in the excavation.
They might, I don't know
They were
if they want to
actually
do
San
80%
Francisco
coverage or 50.
given the freak
difference
coming in through the past the Galapagos Gold Rush that advertised special Galapagos tortoise.
And when we're talking like the different amounts of coverage, we're talking like less than a meter.
That's
so it's hard to get that kind of accuracy.
Archaeologist Simon Conrad, who helped excavate all that
and
then analyze those tortoises,
I have not.
and did a really
I've
brilliant article on it.
I've seen
It came out a
screenshots
few
of
months
it,
ago.
but I've never used it.
It's very similar to what you have here, except
And in that,
I think it has a bit
the
more.
rest of you scientists can see that we archaeologists are
bit more focus on doing.
Can attest to the deliciousness of turtle.
I'll talk to you about it after. You're busy.
I don't know. You haven't lived until you've been in the Arctic like I have with the Inuit, and you have to eat raw steel when you're out on the ice.
Yeah, what I don't know is if with a single tether link, can we
I think I'll stay in Florida.
reach the end or not?
So you thinking a ship move, co-pilot?
I don't know.
It can be fun.
Once we're done with this,
especially with the Klingit and the Haida potentially too.
Maybe his first line, we'll see how it goes.
Oh yeah.
Because I can always come down and give him a little bit more tether.
And D2 is approximately 3 meters wide, right? You'd agree with that, or?
2 meters.
Yeah.
2?
Like 6 feet wide, yeah.
So for those of you who are just joining us, you're being introduced to a shipwreck some 150 miles off the coast of North Carolina in the deep waters, the edge of the Gulf Stream. Brought to you live, the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer. Thanks to the team on board, the ship's crew, the team from the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, and visiting scientists, both on board the ship as well as ashore. We're looking at a shipwreck on Blake Ridge, which was discovered by our colleagues from Duke University, led by Dr. Cindy Van Dover, and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in July of 2015. This wreck, which we believe dates to the early 19th century, maybe a little later, is a largely consumed, that is, eaten by marine organisms, wooden ship, with some fragments of the wood, which you can see, as well as stone, which we believe is ballast to help keep the ship trimmed or in balance, as well as brick and a variety of other artifacts. What we're doing is carefully mapping this wreck in slow, steady transects back and forth that our colleagues from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management will use to develop a three-dimensional scaled map of this site. As archaeologists, in particular, we work much like detectives do, carefully analyzing the scene and mapping everything before there's any disturbance. On this mission, this is not a disturbance mission. Look but do not touch. We don't plan to, nor will we recover anything from this
Copy
site,
that bridge. Hold
but
me
we'll
at
use
225.
this detailed sense of it to better guide decisions towards the future in regards to whether or not more archaeology might be needed. There are many shipwrecks out here. Not all of them, such as this, are as small or in fragments. Others, as I'm sure many of you know, are more intact, like the famous Titanic. But just because this isn't looking like a ship or isn't like Titanic doesn't mean that it's any less important. This is a ship that was built by people, that was crewed by people, some of whom, or maybe all of whom, went down with this vessel. It's also a reminder of times, particularly in the 19th century, when the oceans were the means by which the American economy thrived. Ships like this most likely connected our ports, harvested marine resources from the sea to feed people,
try and come up with
and as well
a rough
also
idea of how much we have left
back and forth.
in the wreck in terms
we
of
are seeing evidence of this vessel having potentially gone all the way down to the Bahamas or up the coast of Florida, thanks to a series of conch shells which are inside the ship, which do not come, thanks to marine scientists on board,
3 or 4
assuring us
passes maybe.
from having landed there or having lived on the wreck and then died. They appear to have been harvested, perhaps, for food. Ultimately, it's what archaeology does. We take these intangible traces, the more tangible traces, we analyze it all, and we work as we are in an interdisciplinary and a multidisciplinary way with our colleagues from across the scientific spectrum to better understand what we're looking at. We are a species that is intimately connected with the sea, and as we now, on board Okeanos Explorer and other vessels, continue to look at the final frontier,
I would estimate 6 to 10 minutes
before
we're done
ocean's unexplored
with the
area.
current survey. And we
When you
would
consider
start
70% of the planet being covered by water,
bow to stern
and
survey.
90% of it, maybe 95% in some cases, unexplored. Missions like this give us a chance
totally
to look
depends
where
on
none
how much overlap
have gone
we
before,
do.
or in this case, a very brief dive by our colleagues in submersible Alvin.
I think they want
the most important part for all of this, though,
they were talking about 60%
is that you're here with us
80%.
now live as it happens, thanks to telepresence. Okeanos Explorer is a NOAA ship, is your ship, and what is done out here not only helps us understand the mysteries of the past, but also the ongoing story of the importance of the ocean, of marine life. And as the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research motto goes, this is boldly going. In some cases where none have gone before, or actually in many cases where none have gone before, discovering new life, and as we see here, finding evidence of our own civilization.
I'm sorry, I just took a whiff briefly, but did we get a new estimate of how long we'll have at the end of the line?
We just got an estimate from NAV of 6 to 10 minutes to finish up this particular set of transects, and then we would start the bow to stern. And the amount of time that takes will depend on how much overlap is required.
Also, if you take a look at stream 2, you can actually see the, from Sirius's point of view, you can see more of the outline of the ship.
Yeah, if anybody wants to switch to stream 2, you can see the outline of the ship as D2 is lighting it up, and this is from Sirius, the other ROV that sits above D2 in the water column.
So I think we settled on the bow to stern passes being overlapped at 80%. But there will be fewer passes bow to stern because it's going to be thinner than the wide passes that we're doing now.
How long is
Does that help with the estimating?
I think it's about under 20 meters.
Oh, so we can do it.
I think so. If I even, the worst case scenario is I move like 5 meters at 135, and then I might have to turn a bunch, which I'm trying to reduce the amount of heading changes seriously, so that way you have
I believe they are looking into answering your question.
The length that we calculated in the beginning.
It's a very difficult ask, I know, and trying to figure it out from here is near impossible. So, thank you guys for trying to help us.
So, I can come down and give you tether as you do your turn on the far side.
It's really great capacity to be able to look down and plan view from Sirius, as well as get the detailed information. It's something I've always enjoyed on the Okeanos missions. Thank you for that.
It's going to be hard.
I've been in a number of, a couple of submersibles, manned submersibles underwater with ports that look out to the side, but don't look down, and also don't have downward-looking cameras. So it really adds to our understanding.
Maybe. Right now I'm up here. I could move down the side.
You're so right. And having been in a submersible a time or two, and the submersible with you, Hans, I very much remember we are getting a keyhole view. We don't get split camera views. We don't have the same access. In many ways, it's all of a sudden being in a dark room and having the lights turned on.
So bow is.
So I'm a big fan of remotely operated vehicles and the technology we're using here. But I'll also say I also still like the occasional getting down there in the sub. It's why we continue to have the desire to send humans into space and not just launch satellites or remote robots. And anybody that watched Matt Damon in The Martian understands how important it is for people to connect to the oceans or as well as to space, because one of us, another human, is out there. So a full suite of exploration vehicles is absolutely essential, and particularly to keep a human being into the mix. But there's also the power and the magic and the ability, thanks to telepresence. So it's not just a couple of us in a sub, but it's all of you that are watching out there, live as it happens, making the discoveries with us at the same time.
Watch leads, Nav.
Yeah, that's true, Jim. Different platforms, different pluses and minuses.
I missed
both doing the job.
The agreed coverage is upon. Are we going to stick
Sorry,
with
I'm late to the show, but any fasteners?
Going to 60% earlier.
We're not seeing a lot, Hans. It's largely consumed.
Okay.
We've seen a couple things that look to be copper, but hard to say.
Gosh, I attempted to mark the bow.
What may be the case is that we're looking at an iron fastened vessel. There is a gudgeon at the stern. We're not. Right now, we're doing very detailed mapping, and the bulk of the dive is going to be that.
Right.
But it's looking early 19th century. It may be iron fastened because I'm not seeing a lot of green in the mix, particularly with the corroded. The chain plates are the iron rolled bark style, but not the earlier sort of 18th century style. The artifacts that we're seeing, bottles and ceramics, would trend more towards the 19th century. Amy Morgan's is on, and she could probably speak more to that.
It would take the
We've got a very nice Austin
to do it lengthwise versus
Cindy Van Dover in the Dick in the Woods whole team in
fewer
July
turns,
2015.
you lose time in turns, but that's it.
Bruce and I to initially characterize. And based on that, we were able to propose this for a dive, and our colleagues at BOEM were very happy to do it because this is another deep breath that, for comparison with some of the work that's been done in the Gulf.
Calling that the bow.
And for the everybody on the line here, Nav needs to know if you would prefer the 60 or 80% overlap. They're trying to plan that out right now. Or somewhere in between.
Roger that. I think based on what we previously said, we want to hear the timing, but ideally we want to keep with the same overlap that we've done on these other transects for maximum data return. Right, Scott?
You could give us numbers for both. We could make that call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Roger that.
That's a good plan. You remember the Parker whaler up there in the northwestern atolls in Papahanaumokuakea Monument, don't you, Jim?
Yes.
That's something we looked at years ago, and I think the Parker, the American whaler, was something like...
Go ahead, watch one.
Early, I think maybe 1840, fairly early.
I sure did.
And I remember we had permission to sample what we thought was an early example of wire rope, and it turned out to be solid bar. I wonder if it's the same type of bar chain.
Yes. Yeah. When we were excavating the wreck of the William Gray in San Francisco, it was buried in landfill in 1851, but the ship had been built in 1825. It had that rolled bar style chain plate. They were all still there. One of the few shipwrecks, actually the only shipwreck I've ever been able to work on where after we excavated it, I was able to walk on the deck. You gotta love San Francisco mud and bay fill, and the fact that the waterfront of the Gold Rush is now the financial district. Just saying.
Yeah, I'd settle for the oyster bar.
Well,
sort of reminiscent of the Alvin Clark, right? When they raised that, walking around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't. I don't remember when the Parker was built, but I mean, she went into the reef in 1840, into the atoll. So I'd imagine it's a hard-working, long-service whaling vessel. Maybe built
the bow right there? Oh, that's the bow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would make sense.
So we've got another.
Remember, the maximum return for the investors is to keep them going as long as they can.
Probably 3 passes.
And when you've got to wait
before that bow is totally out of view.
You're not necessarily going to be constantly upgrading it with, hey, let's get the new chain plates or let's do this or that. You do what's necessary for currents. You change the copper sheathing. You make repairs.
Yeah.
So Hans, 1831. Fairhaven.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
I also remember the Pearl and Hermes atoll, and those were the British whalers very early for the Pacific, 1823, 1822 or so, and the copper sheathing that was trapped underneath the pots.
Right.
So there's a whaling owner, a ship owner willing to make the investment to send those vessels out for years that were copper sheathed, but this one not.
Interesting. To get Lloyd's or later American Lloyd's, you had to resheath, and you had a certain period of time where you had to renew it. Otherwise, you wouldn't get the insurance. Not dissimilar to the fact that with my house insurance, I get a discount if I have a burglar alarm.
I promised to return everything I took.
It's all good. It's all good.
Watch leads now.
What does the presence of an anchor change?
So we have another few passes. It takes about 2 minutes to pass, so if we want to go until the bow is completely out of view, I'd say we have another 5-6 minutes.
You've seen the anchor chain already?
We're done with these track lines.
Measurements on the link? Or we'll wait to see if we can zoom into that.
That will be
We're gonna wait
2 hours and 35 minutes it took us to do that survey.
Foam team has
if we do 80% coverage, it's going to take around the same time to do the lengthwise survey. It's the same area, but we're going to lose a little bit less time for turns. So I'd say about maybe 2 hours 15. I'd say 2 hours to 2:15.
Carefully mowing the lawn, making
it's
sure.
Kind of a rough guess.
Testing the overlap.
And that would be more bottom time than we have.
And take it from there. And so we're waiting for the final numbers.
Sorry.
We may have only 20 minutes in which to go and grab measurements and look at things. We've started a list of diagnostics.
I'm going to start on an estimate for that. I just wanted to communicate
That's
the
good.
80%.
We just did the photogrammetry product on the 19th century steamship landing that we surveyed out here as part of the maritime archaeology course with the University of Hawaii. Brian Grady, one of the students, actually was in charge of that.
Excellent.
Okay, we have an update from NAV. They still have to make a few passes on on this set of tracks in order to get the full bow in. So another 5 or 6 minutes. Then the next survey, the one that we just did, is 2 hours and 35 minutes or so. If we were to do the next survey at 80% coverage, it would wind up being somewhat similar to that, but a little shorter because we don't have as many turns to make. So over 2 hours, and we don't have enough time for that. He's now estimating the 60% and how long that would take.
Hey Hans, I just shot to you the 3D model that we did of 15377 in the Gulf earlier. We only had time to do the bow portion, but you could kind of get an idea of what we're doing. Send it to your NOAA one. Is that still good?
Yeah. That's still good. I'm still waiting to see the stern of Baltimore from Joe. Or was it I think it was the bow. You can work on the bathymetric product bow of the USS Baltimore from the Hawaii survey.
Yeah, I kind of played with that data a little bit too, but some of the challenge of that was that instead of turning around like we're doing here, they went forward and then backed up. So you lost perspective on one whole view. Which really made it difficult, particularly with some of the lighting of the opening and stuff. But portions of it can definitely align on the hull, aligns pretty well in the way that they rose and descended for those. So theoretically, you could attach those two things, but there's some scalar problems bringing them together.
Yeah, I'm still learning about the capacity for the tool, but it's a powerful mapping tool, no question about it. We had some raised derrick pieces, quite a bit of raised structure on the landing site where we did the bathymetry, the photogrammetry, and it was kind of difficult to capture that stuff compared to the features and artifacts.
All right, Josh, Dan says
they
want one track of all sediment. So you're done here until it's 100% sediment.
Okay.
Understood?
I think that's
we were able to kind of play with that over in the Gulf on the New Hope wreck, and I'll send you a link to the bow section of that we were able to compile. But when you have that much structure overhead and there's ship moves involved and things, it becomes very difficult to run those lines exactly the way you'd want to, for sure.
Cool, thanks.
I'm just trying to think of some ideas, Jim, given that they can't do the 80% within the time we have remaining, while still leaving some time for the zooms. Is perhaps what we could do is do the bow to stern sections with 80% overlap with 3 passes down the center.
All right, Nav.
On either side of that brick pile.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Move Sirius
and then
just 5
spread it
meters
out
at 135.
for the edges at that 6% rate.
Down once he's done.
So you'll get that artifact that sort of cluster of artifacts around those pretty well cemented in.
A little bit more tether.
Another option we could totally do as well is do it at the 60%, but then do a slow orbit around that brick and ballast, those 2 sort of broken up brick and ballast sections. And that certainly would give us
we have 150.
some finer scale alignment around those particular piles.
150?
I like that.
So we could do the 60%, do the orbit around the brick pile, I think, because that's where most of the diagnostic artifacts people are concerned about are. Then spend the balance of time on the gimbal for the compass, the cobalt blue ceramic. We've got the octant. We've got the stoneware jug that's near the octant, I think. We've got the ink bottle. We've got that long cylindrical bottle that Frank was interested in. We've got lasers we'd like on the framing near the ballast, and of course the gudgeon. So I don't know what sort of time we have, and that's the difficult thing.
Well, what you're proposing at the last would give us the time to do all of that?
They said they don't have time to do the 80%. Is that right? So our only option is the 60%. Then we could do, a fairly quick orbit around those bricks, and then focus on the artifacts near that brick scatter, and then whatever else you want to do.
Unless I hear otherwise, let's make it so.
Seems the best option we have at the moment.
Did Shipside get that? Do we need to clarify anything?
Did you copy that, Andy?
Okeanos Explorer, did you copy that last transmission on the modification to plan?
Nav was not monitoring that traffic.
OKEX's ROV Navigator, could you repeat again?
Scott, go ahead.
Since it's become clear that we do not have sufficient time to do the 80% overlap on the passes in the orientation of bow to stern, we have decided to reduce the overlap to 60%, which is our understood minimum at this time. Then we'll proceed to a slow orbit around the brick pile, and then use the remainder of the time for zooming on specific diagnostic artifacts with the lasers turned on.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes. I'm working on producing an estimate on how long it's going to take to cover the ship with a 60%. I haven't completed that yet.
Thank you.
Yep. So we about ready for that ship move?
I think once he's done with his...
I don't suppose we have any option for extending the dive time slightly.
Yeah, that's